Hello there. Welcome into a Monday edition of the show. Welcome to June. May just flew by. Appreciate you tuning in, whether it's on your radio, online at extrasports1300.com, or you've downloaded the Extra Sports 1300 app to do your listening. And that app, which is free to download and free to use, is sponsored by Diversus Health. Mental health and well-being for all. A veritable cornucopia of sports topics await you, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this Monday. You can call or text them in at 719-247-1313, or you can tweet at me at Gingerly Tweets. Let's start with basketball. And now that the NBA Finals matchup is set, it'll be OKC in Indiana. It represents a continuing paradigm shift, I think, in the NBA. And we talk about parity and that we're heading for 7 different champions in 7 years. But beyond that, there's a theory, and it was put forth by authors of a soccer book. Called The Numbers Game. It came out 10 to 15 years ago, something like that, where they talked about the idea that in soccer, your weakest link matters more than your strongest link. But in a sport like basketball, your strongest link ultimately means the most. And here's how it breaks down when it comes to basketball versus other sports. And I would probably, if you don't like the soccer analogy, I think you could probably throw football, our football, in there. So the idea is when you only have 5 players on the court at one time, that one player, the best player on the floor, means everything. Right? And we talk about it, right? So-and-so, and we talk about this with the Denver Nuggets, right? The Denver Nuggets have the best player in any series, right? It's Nikola Jokic. Whereas in a sport like, and I'll just move it to the NFL, in the NFL, when you have 11 guys on the field at one time, it actually tends to work the other way, and your weakest link is what ends up having a bigger impact. Couple recent examples when it comes to the Denver Broncos. Riley Moss against the Cincinnati Bengals. Levi Wallace against the Cleveland Browns. Teams can exploit your weakest player. And in fact, it's the entire basis for the way Sean Payton coaches. Right? The way he builds the roster. He wants to create matchup issues and then exploit them. Well, in basketball, it was always, as long as you got the best player, you're good. Well, we have seen a shift here, and I was comparing now to back when our last dynasty occurred, which was the Golden State Warriors. And I know they won one during this 7 different champions in 7 years, but the bulk of their dynasty, right? In those 2018 playoffs, I would say that in 14 of the 15 series that were played in those playoffs in 2018, the team with the best player won. Okay? Compare that to this year, where even if, let's say that the Thunder win, and SGA is the best player in this series, which we would agree. Let's say the Thunder wins. That would be 10 of 15 series in which the team with the best player won. Okay, so it's moving in a different direction, it seems. But even look at it with the Denver Nuggets. What are we talking about? We're talking about the weaknesses of this Nuggets team and how it ultimately cost them. And it's becoming less prevalent for teams to be able to cover up their weaknesses just by simply having the best player on the floor. And this goes right into the idea that, wow, OKC, Indiana, they're so deep, which is true. They're deep in terms of, they go 9, 10 players deep, but they're also deep in their starting five. What you saw in the Nuggets Thunder series, and even in the Clippers series to less of an extent, you saw the Thunder throw 3 guys, sometimes 4, at Nikola Jokic. They just simply made a decision at some point during that series where they're like, we will take our chances with literally anybody else on the floor. Anybody else. You leave Jamal Murray open, you leave Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter, Christian Brown, any of the bench guys, Russell Westbrook most specifically. We'll leave all of them open and we'll dare them to beat us. Now, there's a priority list. They would much rather Russell Westbrook be taking shots than Jamal Murray. But it was the idea of we're just going to throw everything we've got at Nikola Jokic and dare anyone else to beat us. So the fact that the Denver Nuggets had the best player in the series, maybe it was a reason in part why that series went as long as it did. But ultimately what decided it was the fact that Oklahoma City, even if the Nuggets tried to sell out on SGA and put similar numbers on him, there was Jalen Williams, there's Isaiah Hartenstein with that little push shot of his, Chet Holmgren. And what we're seeing in these playoffs is that it's about the matchups more than anything else. There's not one team, I guess you could argue OKC, but it's not as, we're not looking at these series as much as we used to, where there's just a dominant team or multiple dominant teams. Because back when the Warriors were winning, you remember they kept going up against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So there are at least 2 great teams in there where they stepped on the floor with just about anybody and were like, it don't matter. It's Cleveland, it's Golden State. We're just, enjoying some basketball along the way. It's going to be those 2 teams. Now it's maybe one. Boston last year, Denver the year before that, OKC this year. But what we're seeing is, I don't know if the Indiana Pacers had the best player in their series against the Knicks. You can make an argument that Jalen Brunson is better than Tyrese Halliburton at this point. But the matchup favored Indiana. And the depth favored Indiana. And the weakest link proved in that series to be Karl Anthony Towns defensively. And what did Indiana do? They hunted him. So much so that at one point during the series, Tom Thibodeau had to bench Karl Anthony Towns. Didn't play him in the fourth quarter because he was such a liability. And that's what teams do on both ends of the floor. When they're on defense, they're swarming the best player. And when they're on offense, they're running screen and rolls and moving the ball and stuff to try and find the weakest defensive player. And that's happening more and more than just, hey, toss up the ball and the better team wins. So basketball is, as we get more depth in the league, and depth is the thing that appears to be winning the day, basketball is becoming more of a weak link sport. And the Nuggets have to look at it this way. You could say all you want that, well, we have the best player in the world, and that's great. But that only gets you so far, as we've seen the last couple of seasons. With the new GM, who we still don't know who it is, but when they take over, They have to decide what is the best path for us to be able to shore up our weakest link. Right? And we've been talking about it. Is it truly to dive in headfirst to player development and get Peyton Watson and Julian Strother and Jalen Pickett and Deron Holmes, maximize whatever they are, maximize it to give the Nuggets, instead of just maybe 6 guys they can rely on, maybe 8, 9? Or is it looking at it through the lens of who's on the floor with Nikola Jokic the most? And if teams are going to do this, maybe we need to strengthen the guys that are going to be on the court with him, right? Maybe we need to look at Michael Porter or Jamal Murray and say, are they the type of guys that can consistently hurt teams for throwing 3 and 4 guys at Nikola Jokic constantly? Clearly, they weren't in the OKC series. And that brings in, David Adelman challenging, without naming names, challenging Jamal Murray to come back at the start of the season in shape and ready to go. The perpetual discussion about Michael Porter in his health, in his declining performance as playoffs tend to go along. Or is it looking at a Christian Brown and saying, as he's set to be compensated handsomely, as he gets set to become a restricted free agent, can we do better there? And they really have to decide. I think both are viable paths. They both have their own merits, but ultimately the Nuggets this offseason need to look at strengthening their weakest link, because teams are going to continue to attack it. These teams are so well coached. They have so much data. They're just going to keep leaning into the same things that we have seen more recently, and that is just throw a bunch of guys at Nikola Jokic. In fact, you look at the Denver Nuggets, and when Josh Kroenke would qualify their title window being open, which was the year after the bubble, we've seen it with Jamal Murray's injury the first 2 years. Having Nikola Jokic being the best player in a series didn't really get them that far, because they didn't have another guy. And then they had him, and they had more depth, and they won a title. And then the last 2 years, they don't have depth, and you have questions about the guys they once relied upon as the second and third options with Jamal Murray and Michael Porter. So it's fascinating what's going on right now in the NBA with the second luxury tax apron. This is a way it kind of manifests itself, because I get it. You keep talking about, luxury tax and repeater taxes and second thresholds. Your eyes glaze over, right? This is a way that you can see it. You don't have to have an accounting degree or be especially proficient at math, as I am not, to understand what's happening. And what's happening is having the best player is not getting you as far as it used to. And forget the idea of having, the top 2 or 3 guys in a series. That's not happening because of how evenly distributed all the talent is in the NBA now. But we see it with OKC in Indiana. Their weakest links have not been able to be exploited by their competition. Meanwhile, what they do best attacks exactly the weakest parts of the teams they have gone through on their way to the NBA Finals. More than it maybe ever has, your weakest The weakest part about your basketball team, your weakest player, is costing your team more than having the best player is helping your team. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on that. More on our NBA Finals matchup now that it is decided and Indiana finished off the New York Knicks. Coming up next, a message from the interim manager of the Colorado Rockies when it comes to the state of the franchise and why, when we talk about how bad this team is, to put it in baseball terms seems to be doing it an injustice. Welcome in Drive Time Sports on this Monday. Rockies still haven't won a baseball game since the last time we talked, as they got swept by the New York Mets. And it's a good time to kind of check on things. It's not an even sample size, but I was thinking about this the other day. So how is this firing Bud Black going? Right? It was being blamed all on him, apparently, because the general manager kept his job. So how are things going with the Colorado Rockies? Well, before they fired Bud Black, they were 7-33, which was a winning percentage of 175. After firing Bud Black, they have won 2 of their 19 games with Warren Schaefer as the manager, which is a worse winning percentage. Again, the number of games haven't equaled out yet, but they've won a fewer percentage. They've done worse by that metric than they were doing when Bud Black was the manager and he was getting blamed solely. Again, I don't have an issue with the Colorado Rockies firing Bud Black. I'm just saying, why aren't you doing what the Nuggets did in cleaning house completely? Why is Bill Schmidt remaining employed when we could all agree that the bigger issue with this team is its roster and not the day-to-day decisions that are being made by the manager? So after the Rockies lost game 2 of 3 against the New York Mets this weekend, and it's as it so often is with the Rockies, it is almost comical how the game gets away from them. So there's an inning where they just got Tiaro Estrada. He was probably their only free agent signing, if I'm not mistaken, and he's been hurt, which is not anybody's fault. But he finally gets to play, and he commits 2 errors in the span of 2 innings. Now, the second one, he bounces back, and they get a ground ball double play, and they're 1 out away from ending the inning, and then the New York Mets go all home run derby and completely blow out the Colorado Rockies. So even when things are trending in their direction, just wait for the next pitch, and it's going to go the wrong way. In fact, it was Brandon Nimmo, famous for being a Colorado Rockies fan growing up in Wyoming, that started the home run barrage. So after the game, Warren Schaefer was asked, what would be your message to fans? As I'm looking at my TV and seeing that SportsCenter is once again talking about the Colorado Rockies. Warren Schaefer said, "Stick with us. I think you're seeing progress if you're watching the games closely. Today was not our best game, admittedly, but we have been playing good baseball for the last 10 days. We just haven't seen the wins coming." Okay. First of all, it is unfair for anyone to ask anybody to closely watch the Colorado Rockies. And I know he didn't mean it this way, but it's almost like the real ones know. And it's like, no, we're all paying attention. We don't need to scrutinize every little bit. But you know what? I took his advice. I did it so you don't have to. If you look at some of the underlying numbers, the runs allowed has gotten much better. Much better. They've shaved almost 5 runs a game. Lot of improvement there. Problem is, they're scoring they're going from about 4 runs a game to about less than 2 that they're scoring. So to me, that kind of evens out. So where's the better baseball? What's the stat I can look at? Because I'm looking at the runs they've given up. That's gotten better, but the runs they're scoring have gotten fewer. So I don't quite see what Warren Schaefer is talking about. And again, to ask somebody to sit down for 3 hours and intently scrutinize Colorado Rockies baseball is just, it's bordering on cruel and unusual. I think we got a pretty good idea of what's going on. And the story is the winning or lack thereof. So he can say that they're playing better baseball, but the wins aren't coming. That's the entire point. You're not winning games. You're losing games at a historic rate, and now they stand alone. This is the most games that we have had to wait for a Major League Baseball team to get to their 10th win. Already right now. They play coming up in about an hour in Miami, or hour and a half, something like that. I think it's a 5 o'clock first pitch. In the history of Major League Baseball, we have never had to wait longer than this to have a team get 10 wins. So, with all due respect to Warren Schaefer, whose team is losing at a greater clip than the team was under his predecessor, the wins are the thing. That's what we're basing this on. We're not looking at ERA, run score, batting average. We're just looking at the wins and losses. That's the story right now with the Colorado Rockies. And it's getting so bad that to compare it to what has happened in baseball history is almost too small. Right? How bad the Rockies are and how few wins they have had. To put it in baseball terms seems like doing it a bit of a disservice. So enter, I believe it was CBS Sports this weekend, that put up a graphic that says since May 2nd, which is exactly a month, Scotty Scheffler has more wins on the PGA Tour than the Colorado Rockies have wins in Major League Baseball. Since May 2nd, Scotty Scheffler has won 3 tournaments in 4 tries. The Colorado Rockies have won 4 times in 28 tries. So where we're at now with the Rockies is that you have to compare it to other sports. You have to broaden the borders here. Because simply talking about it in baseball terms, it doesn't work anymore. Right now, they have the same record as the 72-73 Philadelphia 76ers. They are only 1 game better at this point than the 2015-2016 Sixers, who that year finally said enough is enough, we're done with the process, and fired Sam Hinkie. These are the teams, and obviously there's much more baseball season to be played. So they're going to end up probably, maybe, with more wins than that Sixers team did. But it's just the point that the comp, if you go outside of baseball, is a team that basically out and out stated that they were trying to lose. Which begs the question, what is the Rockies' process? Okay, so we know that 15-16 Sixers team was trying to lose in order to get a high draft pick. What is this Rockies team doing? What is the plan? What is the process here? Because they like the Sixers, and this is actually a great example. The Sixers for 3 years tried the process, and we're like, we're done with this. The Rockies have lost 100 games in back-to-back years, and they're well on their way this year. But the difference is, at least the Sixers had a plan over those 3 years. We don't know the Rockies' plan. And therein lies the biggest issue with all of this. Okay, because in the NL West, you could say, look, what good does it do the Colorado Rockies to be at their best, whatever that looks like? They're still going to get crushed. But we don't know what the ideas are here. Are they trying to lose? Because I don't know that they're trying to lose. That's the saddest part about it. I think they're trying to be the best version of themselves, and they have 9 wins. But it would be helpful if somebody at the top of the organization, say maybe an owner, would crawl out of his hole, whatever hole he's living in right now, and tell us what the plan is. What is the grand vision? Because ask any Sixers fan. The fan base was somewhat divided, but there was a good chunk of Philadelphia 76ers fans who idolized Sam Hinkie and bought in hook, line, and sinker into what he was selling. They bought into the process 100%. We don't even know what that is with the Colorado Rockies. So it would be helpful in times like this for Dick Monfort to come out and say, look, this is what's going on. First of all, apologize to people, but then go into what's the grand plan here? What are you trying to accomplish? Because anti-tanking rules in Major League Baseball are making it so you can't have any pick better than 10th. So you can't actually pull off the process the way that the Sixers did. At least they had a chance for the number 1 pick. The Rockies don't. So Dick Monfort speaking would be helpful. I have seen Josh Kroenke twice in the last 2 weeks answering many questions about the direction of his team. To his credit, you may disagree with some of Josh Kroenke's answers, but at least he's answering things. At least he's visible. He's sitting up there and telling you, without giving away everything, but giving you enough for you to formulate your opinion on the direction of the Denver Nuggets. He's been up there twice in the last 2 weeks. I have seen the brain trust for the Colorado Avalanche multiple times in more recent memory than I've seen Dick Monfort. I've seen the Broncos brain trust. The best we can do is a quote or two in a Denver Post article from Bill Schmidt. And that is not nearly enough. Dick Monfort needs to speak, needs to address what's going on with his baseball team. This is national news every single day. Something that, I mean, there were times when the Rockies played in the World Series that they didn't make the rundown on SportsCenter every day. Every single day, they are in the national news cycle. They're on PTI. And it's crickets. And that's unacceptable. So you send this interim manager out there saying ridiculous things like, stick with us, we're playing better baseball, but you're not winning anymore. And he's got to take all the slings and the arrows while the people who are actually to blame for the state of this baseball franchise are not speaking. It's cowardly. It really is. And there's no, with all due respect to Warren Schaefer, there's no end in sight. There's no month-long run. There's no 2-week run. They haven't won a series. I'm actually hearing, here's another anecdote. I'm hearing New York baseball fans warring over how their teams did against the Rockies. I heard this today on a nationally syndicated show. A Mets fan calling in and dunking on the Yankees because the Mets swept the Colorado Rockies and the Yankees could only win 2 of 3. That was an actual phone call. The New York baseball teams are measuring themselves against each other based on their success against the Colorado Rockies. And the fact that the Yankees couldn't come into Coors Field and sweep them is being used by Met fans as ammunition to why they are the best team in New York. That is where we are right now in the world. And again, we're hearing so many people talk about the Rockies, but not Dick Monfort. 719-247-1313. Coming up next, Deion Sanders speaks out on the slide of Shador and whether all the reports going on around his son in the lead up to the draft were actually factual. The 45th U.S. Senior Open is returning to the Broadmoor for a record-tying third time, and why wouldn't they? It's an amazing course. Get your tickets to see the world's best golfers compete June 26th through the 29th at ussenioropen.com. Deion Sanders went on Asante Samuel's podcast. Add him to the list of athletes that have a podcast. There are plenty of them, but I had no idea Asante Samuel did, and now I do. Pretty big get for Asante Samuel, if I'm being honest. So Deion Sanders is making headlines because he's refuting the very notion that Shedeur had a bad lead up to the draft, that he interviewed poorly. There have been multiple national reporters and talk hosts who have said that Shedeur Sanders interviewed poorly. The most notable example was the New York Giants, where they did, it kind of felt to me a little like draft day, where they said they put the $100 bill at the back of the playbook and then asked the prospects about it. And then if they said they didn't see the $100, then they know they didn't read the playbook. It's kind of similar when I read and hear these reports that the Giants intentionally put mistakes in their plays and they put it on the draft prospects to point them out. Interesting way of doing things. And Shedeur couldn't point out what was wrong. And when they challenged him on it, he got a little bit upset about it. And there were other reports that he did a FaceTime call during the meeting and would not get off of the FaceTime call. He went in with headphones. It runs the gamut when it comes to what Shedeur Sanders allegedly did in some of his pre-draft interviews, which he didn't take many of. So Deion Sanders said, quote, when you sit up there and say something like he went into a meeting unprepared, like, dude, Shedeur Sanders, who has had 6 different offensive coordinators, who has still functioned and leveled up every time we brought somebody new in, and you're going to tell me he was unprepared. You're going to tell me he had on headphones. Anybody who knows my son understands he's a professional. He's going to go into a meeting with headphones on. Y'all, come on now. He's refuting these reports. He's saying these reports are lies. I mean, I don't. What other way am I supposed to interpret that? Not, it's been a little bit overblown. Could Shedeur have done a few things better in the pre-draft process? Sure, but it's getting out of control with the number. Like, he's refuting the very idea that Shedeur Sanders in any pre-draft meeting was anything resembling unprofessional. Which is interesting because there are many reports out there, so somebody is fibbing. Or Deion Sanders is believing his son. There's, I suppose, a third option where Shedeur is telling Deion that he didn't do those things, and he's believing him. But at the same time, Deion Sanders is well connected in the NFL community. You don't think he checked up on some of these things? You don't think he heard? So somebody's flat out lying here. Now, I can buy the idea that Shedeur Sanders didn't come off well, because we have heard that there are many NFL prospects that don't interview well, and it costs them. But I can't help but feel like, Deion Sanders is being so black and white here. No, he wasn't being unprofessional. I could see a gray area in which maybe he did some things that rubbed teams the wrong way, and they characterized them as unprofessional. Maybe it's a game of telephone between these reporters or these national talk show hosts and people within the NFL organization. Maybe some things are getting lost here. But I mean, it struck me how vehemently Deion Sanders is denying all of it. And I can't imagine we go from Shedeur did nothing wrong to a myriad of reports that he did a bunch of stuff wrong. I think the truth has got to be somewhere in the middle. Perhaps some of these reports are not as true. Some may have gotten a little bit embellished. But clearly, Shedeur Sanders didn't have the best pre-draft interview process in the history of the draft. Right? But I've said that I feel like the circus, the sideshow, and Deion are more to blame for Shedeur's slide, and more the reason why it seemed like these teams want to send some sort of a message to Shedeur Sanders. I think it's that stuff. Because if the talent was overwhelming, or if I think having a poor interview can be overlooked to some extent. But you couple it with all this other stuff and how he would be a perceived distraction, and look at the coverage coming out of Cleveland. I mean, it's all Shedeur Sanders all the time. Everything they talk about is through the lens of Shedeur. Will Dillon Gabriel beat out Shedeur? Can Shedeur overtake Joe Flacco? Is Shedeur going to make the roster? It's exactly playing out in Cleveland the way that many teams probably feared it would if they brought him into their organization. But Deion Sanders is going to do what Deion Sanders does. He's going to defend his son, and I would expect nothing less. But I mean, to say that all of this is made up, that Shedeur did nothing in the draft process that could be construed as unprofessional, I don't know that I believe that. He had to do something. You don't arrive at an adjective like unprofessional for no reason. But we'll never know. I mean, like most things, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Did Shedeur do all the things he's accused of doing in these pre-draft meetings? Probably not. Did he do a couple of those things? Probably. And then you add in all the other stuff that comes along with being a Sanders, and it turned a lot of teams off. But he's in Cleveland now, and I think he's going to play for the Cleveland Browns this year at some point. And it could all end well for Shedeur Sanders after all of this. There was another part of the podcast that is not of as much national note, but certainly locally. You know, Asante Samuel asked Deion Sanders whether he is compensated fairly for what he brings to CU. And Deion went on to talk about the economic impact, the sales of paraphernalia, which I do believe Deion Sanders gets a cut of. So to say that merchandise sales are through the roof, well, you're being compensated for that. I believe anything that has Coach Prime on it, Deion Sanders gets a cut of it. But Asante Samuel asked him those contract negotiations when Deion Sanders became one of the highest paid coaches in college football. Did CU basically go to you and say, we know we can't afford you. We know we can't pay you what you rightly deserve. Will you still extend your contract? And Deion basically acknowledged that that's kind of how it went. And maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But that just further feeds it why he feels like he can retire his son's number in front of other, perhaps more deserving, or at least players who have waited longer. And he feels like he can say that a specific reporter can't ask him questions anymore. I mean, he feels, whether it's true that CU just said, please sign here, we're begging you, we're giving you every dollar we possibly can, please just extend your contract with us. Whether that's true or not, there's a thought in Deion's head that CU can't begin to repay him, can't pay him nearly enough for what he has done for the school. So that's where this other stuff comes into play. But like all this other stuff, it's just you weigh the pros and the cons. He's not 100% wrong, right? He's not telling lies when he talks about the impact that his arrival in Boulder has had. The metrics are out there. Applications, enrollment, the economic impact on game days, the attendance, all this kind of stuff. He's not wrong. But when he feels like that means that there is a deficit when it comes to what he is being paid versus what he is, in a way, paying CU, what he's giving CU, and they're not, maybe giving's the better word. There's a discrepancy between what he's giving CU and what CU is giving him. That's where he starts to make up the difference with this other stuff. Well, I'm not going to answer questions from that guy. Or if I want to retire my son's number, I'm going to do it. Because I've done far more for you than you've done for me. That exists, and it's going to continue to exist. But in times like that, if you're CU, you just look at it and you're like, where were we without it? We'll deal with a little bit of this stuff. If it gets us all that Deion Sanders brings to the table. 719-247-1313. Coming up next, the NBA Finals are set. Are you going to watch? Welcome in, Drive Time Sports. Ryan Kaufman with you. Appreciate you watching the show on our social media platforms at XTRA Sports 1300. You can do that on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and X as well. I knew I was missing one. If you want to weigh in on the day's topics, feel free to do so by texting or calling in 719-24-7. 1313, or you can tweet at me at Gingerly Tweets. So since we last spoke on Friday, the Indiana Pacers did not need a Game 7 to finish off the New York Knicks, and the series that everyone is saying is the NBA's worst nightmare has come about as the Oklahoma City Thunder take on the Indiana Pacers. Is it the preferred matchup of the NBA league offices? It's probably not. No. But it is absolutely the matchup that they asked for. The owners and Adam Silver collectively decided that they wanted the truest form of parity, where anyone had a chance not just to get into the playoffs like the NFL, but to win the whole thing. So I have a hard time feeling sorry for the NBA if indeed they don't like the fact that it's Indianapolis against Oklahoma City as the two cities. And I know I've heard plenty of ESPN personalities complain about the fact that they're going to be going back and forth from Indiana to OKC. I feel even less for them. But this is the matchup they asked for. You don't think that with all these financial rules you have put into place, that eventually smaller market teams that always have to work smarter and harder than teams in LA or a team in Miami or New York, that they're going to be the first to figure all of this out? Of course they are. For years, they've been doing better. Oklahoma City was able to assemble a team of Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, and James Harden. Like, these smaller market teams are good at drafting. They make good hires when it comes to head coaches. And you look compared to some of the huge mistakes that have been made by the Lakers or the Knicks or the Nets. Now, they have a little bit of latitude because eventually, as long as they can get their house relatively in order, good things will happen for them, as we have seen in recent memory. But the smaller markets are always grinding harder. They're always having to make the best decisions possible, or else they're going to get buried. And now rules have come into play that level the playing field a little bit, and the really smart front offices are winning. And now they're playing. So maybe they don't want this matchup, but they asked for this matchup. And I, for one, actually really like the matchup. You have the league's best offense against the league's best defense. It's a pretty good matchup. We don't get that all the time. The only thing that I worry about with this series, and I think it's going to be something that, perpetuates the hate that this matchup is getting, I don't think this is going to be a very long series. I don't know, as we really get into it, how truly compelling this thing's going to be. Because I look at this matchup and I say that the Pacers are basically Oklahoma City light. Like, anything that Indiana would bring to the table, like coming off of the series against the Knicks, The biggest thing that won them that series was their pace. The New York Knicks just couldn't keep up with them. Oklahoma City's just as fast or in the same ballpark. Right? We saw it in the Nuggets series. The Nuggets were desperately trying to slow the pace down, and they couldn't. So Indiana wants to play fast. OKC's like, cool, we'll play fast. The depth of Indiana, right? They go 9-10 deep. So does OKC, and OKC's 9 or 10 players are on the whole better than Indiana's 9 or 10 players. Indiana has a rising star at point guard in Tyrese Halliburton, who's been amazing in these playoffs. OKC has Shea. So as I look at this series, it doesn't bother me other than the fact that I would have preferred the team that played OKC in the second round of the Western Conference playoffs were here instead of OKC. I really like this matchup. I think it's fun and good for these patient, smart, well-run organizations for getting rewarded. And it's my hope that this thing is an unbelievable series. Back and forth, heroics in every game, and this thing goes to 7. It's my sincere hope. I just look at it and I say this thing could be over pretty quick. Like OKC in 5 quick. And that will just continue to perpetuate the idea this is the matchup no one wanted. And see, trust me, New York has less of a chance of beating OKC than Indiana does. Trust me on that. Without the Boston Celtics, because I do think that would be an epic matchup if it was the Boston Celtics against the Oklahoma City Thunder. But give credit to the Knicks. They had taken control of that series. They were going to win that series, and then Jason Tatum got hurt. Again, it goes back to my point I made at the start of the show today. Matchups matter more. Your weaknesses are more magnified in today's NBA. The Knicks built their team to beat the Boston Celtics. That's how they put this team together. And to their credit, it worked. But you can't be a bad matchup for everybody. You can't get together the personnel required to be a bad matchup for everybody. So Knicks are a bad matchup in some ways for the Boston Celtics, but the Indiana Pacers are a bad matchup for New York. And if Indiana is OKC light and everything Indiana can do, OKC can do better, as the song rings through my head, how do you think New York would fare against Oklahoma City? Sure, we wouldn't get to see Chalamet and Kylie Jenner on the sideline, which I am just as big of a fan of both of those individuals as anybody. That's a lie. I'm actually not a fan of either. I don't know that I've seen one Timothée Chalamet movie. I'm a little bit more of a fan of Kylie's older sister, if we're being real about it. But the point is, we won't get the stars on the court side. ABC won't get to do the cam. Look at all these celebrities. But from a basketball standpoint, this is a fascinating matchup. Problem is, OKC is much better at all the things Indiana does well. But I'll be watching it and hoping that it goes long. I don't care if it's OKC or Indiana. I know those maps come out on social media. Everybody's rooting for Indiana except in Oklahoma. I don't really. I'm not. I don't care who wins. I really don't. I don't live vicariously through a team and say Indiana, if they knock off OKC as a Nuggets fan, it'll make me feel better. I don't do that. I guess if I had to go one way, it would be Indiana, but if OKC wins, fine. Just make the matchups more compelling between the Nuggets and the Thunder next year, that the Thunder are the defending champions. And you have those matchups between two teams that have won 2 of the last 3 NBA titles. But that will get started what? Wednesday, Thursday? Why are we waiting so long? Like, seriously. Same with the Stanley Cup final. Like, let's get to it. I will say that the Stanley Cup final, I think that series is going to be epic. So if you're like, before it really goes into the dead period in the sports calendar and you want the best send off into that, probably check out the hockey over the basketball. Because I think OKC can finish this thing off fairly quickly. I hope I'm wrong, because I just want to see a good NBA Finals, but don't think that's going to happen. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts. And then if OKC wins, then we can have the discussion. Right? Well, we'll have it if Indiana wins anyway, but you look at the 7 different teams to win titles in 7 years in the new NBA, where parity is abound. Where would the Nuggets rank among these 7 times? I gotta wait. I gotta see if OKC does to Indiana what I think they're going to do. Then I think this OKC team may be at the top. But we'll find out. That's a little bit later this week. Same with the Stanley Cup, the rematch between Florida and Edmonton. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on both finals. We'll be talking a lot about them throughout the week. We'll take a break for now. The College Football Hall of Fame ballot is out, and it is long. Try to distill it down. A couple of Buffs and a Falcon up for consideration. I can't even imagine what it's like to be a voter for the College Football Hall of Fame. I really can't. The ballot for the next class to be inducted is out, and it is like 80 players long, and then like a dozen coaches. There's so many players. And to sift through all of these is no small task. So I do my profound respect to those who are in charge of inducting players into the College Football Hall of Fame, because there are just so many factors. Like, you can't even in many ways normalize the competition. Like, for instance, there's a wide receiver. I want to say it's Jared Dillard is his name. My apologies if I don't. I mean, there's like a dozen wide receivers alone on this thing. But he played at Rice. So he played at Rice, and his numbers, it was Jared Dillard. He had 60 touchdowns in his career, like far more than any of these other guys that are in his group, but he played at Rice. And it's like, what do you do with that? Another one, even one in some ways like Kellen Moore, right? Kellen Moore was such a prolific passer. He had almost 1,500 yards, 500 more than 500, about 500 more than Robert Griffin III, who's the next closest guy among the group of quarterbacks that are eligible for induction. Threw 142 touchdowns, which is basically double what RG3 did. But you know where Kellen Moore played. It was a different time for Boise State football back then. Can you just put him in because his numbers are better? Like, you can't even how do you normalize the competition level? Because with the Pro Football Hall of Fame, yeah, there are going to be years where you don't play a certain team, but eventually, if you play for long enough, you get around to everybody. Right? In the college football world, and we're getting ready to get this shoved in our face here pretty soon when, the SEC and the Big Ten break away from the NCAA, and there's basically two levels of Division I college football. Very different worlds. And to try and compare them, it's interesting. There are three players that are up for induction. Terry Mackey, I believe, linebacker from Air Force. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong on the pronunciation, and if I am, I do apologize. And then you have Eric Bieniemy for CU, and Chris Hudson, who played at CU. So two Buffs and a Falcon are up for induction. I know there's been a lot of talk recently about the loosening of the restrictions or the lowering of the bar when it comes to winning percentage for coaches to be considered for induction. And this will henceforth be known as the Mike Leach rule. Because when Mike Leach passed away, we're looking at the winning percentage and we're like, he's not eligible for the College Football Hall of Fame. How is this possible? Well, they're changing the rules. The issue is they lowered the bar, but now the bar is just above where Sonny Lubick would be. So there's a lot of talk locally about, like, wait a minute, you lowered it so you could put Mike Leach in, and that's all well and good, but you still have it too high for Sonny Lubick. Shouldn't it just be anybody, any coach? Let people sort out the winning percentage and how much that adds or detracts from somebody's Hall of Fame candidacy. And I tend to agree with them, Although, again, I'm looking at just the list of players, and I'm like, if we're also throwing in every coach. So I guess there's arguments on both sides. I would like to see if Sonny Lubick would make it. I don't think that he would, but I would like to see if he would get in. I'll say this. He doesn't have nearly I don't think he has the argument the way that Mike Leach does. But I would be interested to see if Sonny Lubick could get in. But he's not eligible. Winning percentage wasn't high enough. But anyway, back to the players. Now, there are so many players to go through. And I looked, I'll talk about Eric Bieniemy. The running back in this class that I think is an absolute shoo-in, no question, Mark Ingram. By far. Mark Ingram should get in over any of these other guys. The whole list of running backs: Eric Bieniemy, Kajana Carter, Vaughn Dunbar, Byron Hanspard, Garrison Hirsch, Craig Hayward, Marshawn Lynch, and Jonathan Stewart. Mark Ingram has the best resume of all of them. So he should get in without any issue. And I don't know that it has to be one or two from each position group, but if we're just grouping it, like if I were a voter, this is kind of how I would do it. I'd go first blush through the ballot and say he's good, he's good, he's good, he's good. Right? But then if I dug into it, I would kind of go, I kind of look at it position by position. And after Mark Ingram, I think you can make a case that Eric Bieniemy is the most deserving. So Eric Bieniemy rushed for almost 3,900 yards, 41 touchdowns. He was an All-American. He was third in the Heisman voting in 1990 and won a national championship. Only he and Mark Ingram of this class of running backs can say they won a national title. And that matters. If for no other reason than just breaking a tie here. But you look at Bieniemy's numbers, he's second to only Mark Ingram in rushing touchdowns. Rushing yards, he's third behind Byron Hanspard, who played for Texas Tech back in the late 90s. He won the Doak Walker Award in 96. And Vaughn Dunbar, who I mentioned at Indiana, are only ones who rushed for more yards. But you couple the yards and the touchdowns, I think it comes down to Eric Bieniemy and Kajana Carter. Who's the next most deserving running back in this class? Kajana Carter, I remember him at Penn State. He was a phenom. Was a bust, went to Cincinnati. But he was second in the Heisman voting in 94. He was an All-American. Didn't have the number of yards Bieniemy did, the number of touchdowns, but he's a bigger play threat. Average over 7 yards a carry. I think Bieniemy's got a real chance here. If you just look at the running backs, only Mark Ingram has definitely a better resume than Eric Bieniemy does. So I think he has a really good chance. Quarterbacks were interesting. You know, to me, I'm going to see what you think of this. If you win a Heisman Trophy, you get in. Is that fair? I think that is. So I look at RG3 and Cam Newton and say they have to get in. They're both Heisman Trophy winners. You only get one a year. It's the most prestigious award in the sport. To me, that's automatic. Automatic if you want a Heisman. They only play 3 or 4 years. So it's not like we're talking about like the conversation with Terrell Davis back in the day. Well, he only played so many years, and he only had, this 3 or 4 year window where he was elite. All these guys have 3 or 4 year windows. So to me, if you win a Heisman Trophy, you get in the College Football Hall of Fame. So Cam Newton and RG3 would be in. Outside of that, I remember when Brad Banks was up for the Heisman. He's on this list. Ken Dorsey, quarterback, that powerhouse Miami team. Interestingly enough, Larry Coker, I put in as a coach. I don't think I put in Ken Dorsey. I looked at Kellen Moore or Antoine Randall L. Antoine Randall L was, he was unbelievable as a dual threat quarterback. Like, you think Cordell Stewart was impressive when he was in Boulder. Like, Antoine Randall L passed for 7,500 yards and rushed for almost 4,000. And he was the first player in college history to pass for 40 touchdowns and rush for 40 touchdowns. To me, that's worthy of inclusion. I don't believe that Indiana team really played in any huge games, which can be held against him a little bit, but I don't know. I think I would put him in over Kellen Moore, over Ryan Leaf. Because we have to, you have to separate, and maybe you don't have to do this as much as I do, but there are players who are great draft prospects, and we talk about a lot when it comes to the draft, but aren't necessarily one of the greatest college players ever. And I think as phenomenal as Ryan Leaf was at Washington State, and he was, I think we talk about Ryan Leaf as more of a draft prospect than one of the all-time great college quarterbacks. In the 1 year, obviously, rivaled Peyton Manning, but his career doesn't nearly match up to what Peyton Manning's was. So I had to talk myself out of some of these guys. I'm like, wait a minute. We were talking about them for the top of the draft, but did they accomplish in college, or were they just a really good draft prospect? But I'm looking at some of these other ones, like Percy Harvin. And I guess Antoine Randall L would fit in with this. Like, these guys that were so unique and so special, even if they don't have the wins or the high, or weren't included in a Heisman Trophy race. What they did was so spectacular that I feel like it deserves this honor. And Percy Harvin's an easier argument, I certainly think, than Antoine Randall L. Because Percy Harvin was a national champion, played for one of the most notable college football teams of my life. Those Gator teams with Herb. But there's some big names on here. Des Bryant, Marvin Harrison, Deshaun Jackson. Don't forget some of these guys like Marvin Harrison and Deshaun Jackson also played special teams, were also returners. And a blast from my past, because one of the national championship games that I was most hyped for was when Michael Vick went against Florida State. Peter Warrick was on that Florida State team. Peter Warrick was awesome. And he was another guy that became a bust. I think he got in a lot of trouble, too, when he went to the Bengals. That's when the Bengals were kind of known as a team that employed some people that would run afoul of the law. But Peter Warrick at Florida State was unbelievable. 32 touchdowns and 3,100 yards receiving. So I did Ingram, Griffin, and Cam all automatically in. They're all Heisman Trophy winners. They get in. And then I looked at it and I would say the two best cases in the running back room would be Eric Bieniemy and Kajana Carter, with Bieniemy having a better resume. Then it would be Antoine Randall L against Kellen Moore, and I would have Randall L above Moore. No Heisman Trophy winners in the with wide receivers, obviously. And I would have Percy Harvin and Peter Warrick as my two. But man, you go even on the defensive side, and I'm going to dig into this a little bit more tonight and look at the defensive side of it. But Courtney Brown, remember Courtney Brown and how good he was at Penn State? Elvis Dumerville, former Bronco, was a Cardinal back then. Aaron Donald. How decorated Aaron Donald was at Pitt. And Ndamukong Suh, one of the most dominant college football players I've ever seen. So there are big names on both sides of the football here. I don't know how they do it. I really don't. I guess I kind of just did it, but to do it year in and year out with like 80 players, and I think the two coaches I highlighted, Larry Coker for Miami, and then the other one, Gary Patterson, was in there, who I thought about. What was the other one I had? Oh, Chris Peterson. So I don't give the nod to Kellen Moore, but I give the nod to Chris Peterson. So some Boise State. And obviously Dan Hawkins deserves credit for the rise of Boise State football, but Chris Peterson was kind of took the baton and blew it up, right? And then obviously he had a successful stint at Washington as well. I marked Chris Peterson and Larry Coker. Gary Patterson, again, one of those on there, but a lot of big names in here. We'll see. I think that Eric Bieniemy has a really good chance. We'll see if he gets in. I think the voting closes in a month, July 1, I think. 719-247-1313. Any of those names stand out to you? I just spent like part of my day just kind of going back and thinking about watching some of these guys and how good they were in college. Man, Peter Warrick was so good. Even Percy Harvin, too. Maybe their NFL career didn't quite match up, but in college, they were unstoppable. 719-247-1313. More Drive Time Sports after this. College Football Hall of Fame nominees are out. About 80 players and another dozen coaches eligible. Got a question on the text line. How many get in? Unclear. I don't think there is a set number. I think they can put in as many as they want. So I think it's somewhat similar to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The Pro Football Hall of Fame says, yeah, you could probably expect between 4 and 8. And I can't find any number like that with the College Football Hall of Fame. So I think they could put in as many as they want. Now, let's be real about this. Are there that many? I mean, I highlighted 2 wide receivers out of like a dozen. It was Warwick and Harvin that I would even consider. So naturally, this is going to thin down, and you know how voters are. They're a little stingy. I would say that you should be able to bank on Mark Ingram, RG3, and Cam Newton. Well, Cam Newton, what's of all the stuff that happened with him while he was in college? You know, the recruiting violations and things like that. But in terms of their merits as players, I think Ingram, RG3, and Cam Newton are locks. And I think you look at just one name that caught my eye on the defensive side. I spent much more time today on the offense. On the defensive side, there's no way Aaron Donald's not getting in. There's no way. But I can't find I can't find a set number. Looking at something, I'm surprised Alfred Williams isn't on. He's already in. He got inducted in 2010. So Alfred Williams already is in there. Could Eric Bieniemy be joining him? Well, again, that national championship, right? That national championship for Eric Bieniemy carries a lot of weight. As many names as on here, not many of them won a national title. So I think other than Ingram, you could definitely say Eric Bieniemy is the most deserving running back in this class. You could put him above a lot of the quarterbacks because not only did he finish higher in the Heisman voting than some of these quarterbacks, but again, Natty won the national championship. Only 2 players for the in the wide receiver group have won national championships, and that's Percy Harvin and Peter Warwick. So I think Eric Bieniemy has a really good chance, and we'll see where the voting goes. Man, there are just so many names. 719-247-1313. Good win for the Switchbacks this weekend. By the way, bouncing back, you know, I had said going into last week's match against Orange County that I thought that the Switchbacks were looking like they did last year when they started to get going, where they drew against Indy and then got a win against Oakland and they kind of took off from there. I was seeing some of that. I was feeling that way after they got the road tie against Vegas and came home and beat Pittsburgh. And then they went out and got beat soundly by Orange County last week. And I didn't abandon my thought, but I was like, ooh, what's going on here? And then for them to beat El Paso this past weekend, as hot a team as we had in the USL Championship. This is a really good win. And I know, they didn't play, and I don't know the reason why. I mean, I can barely get lineup information out of the club that I call matches for, let alone the opposing club. But you had two of your best players in Andy Cabrera, the son of the coach Wilmer Cabrera, and Armando Moreno on the bench to start the game. But they came in pretty quick in the second half. And Switchbacks were still able to hold them off the board and get a clean sheet. So I didn't waver after the Orange County match. But it was good to see the boys get that win down in Texas, and still one more. And it's so weird, the Jägermeister Cup part. I was led to believe that, like, this, Roland and I were trying to make comparisons like the NBA Cup. Like, I thought it counted doubly. It doesn't. There aren't extra matches, but it doesn't go towards the USL Championship standings, which is, I don't know. If you're not adding games, if you're not adding these games to the schedule, then shouldn't they doubly count? But they didn't doubly count. So Switchbacks stay where they are in the USL Championship standings, but they do are tied for second now in their group in the Jägermeister Cup. Another trophy for them to perhaps chase this season. But the biggest thing is results in 3 of their last 4. They played very well in 3 of their last 4 matches, just in time to take on the best team in the West in New Mexico coming up this Saturday before coming back home for Father's Day weekend. So good win for the Switchbacks, and congratulations to Quincy Humerman for scoring his first goal of the season. He's looked a dangerous player for much of the year, hasn't broken through, and he did when the team needed it. Team needed it on Saturday. So Switchbacks with the 1-0 win, and they'll shift their attention to New Mexico Saturday night, 7 o'clock, right here on Extra Sports 1300. I have to laugh. I just saw something, 3 potential Cooper flag trades that the Mavericks might not immediately reject, but eventually they'll reject. Man, we are in that part of the calendar, aren't we? See if the Nuggets are on here. This is ESPN. No Nuggets. I did see one mock trade that for Giannis today, where the Knicks, because that's all the talk now with the Knicks in the wake of them losing to Indiana, they got to get rid of Cat, which to me seems like a bit of an overreaction. But if you're trading Cat for Giannis, then okay. But trying to run Cat out of town, I feel like is a little much from the Knicks fan base. But I saw a trade today that was Cat and the OG Anunoby. No, it wasn't, because I thought that they would have to include one of their, I guess OG's not in one of their main guys, but he's certainly a significant contributor. It was Cat, Tyler Kolek, and a pick swap. Oh, no, a pick swap and a first round pick in, I don't know, forever from now. And I thought to myself, why can't the Nuggets do that? I mean, if that's the answer, there's no way that much will get it done for Giannis, considering the amount of young talent and draft capital that an OKC, and I don't think they're going to do it, so I should probably not throw them out there. It's not, they've gotten here because of how patient Sam Presti has been, right? They didn't chase another star like they did Paul George. They kind of learned their lesson after that and said, we're not going through that again. But the patience that he showed, it would be unlike them, especially if they win a title. You're going to go out and you're going to get like that's a type of move you do on NBA 2K. Like, I just won a title, but I can land Giannis, so I'm going to. But like San Antonio, Houston, they have draft capital, they have young assets, and the Bucks are going to trade Giannis to the Knicks for Cat, who's not going to get them any. What's the plan with Karl Anthony Towns? And Tyler Kolek's nothing, and you don't have any great draft capital. So I'm looking at that trade and saying, if that's any indication of what the Bucks could entertain, the Nuggets could easily match that and not include Nikola Jokic. That's like, it's not even Christian Brown. It's like Peyton Watson, who would be the comp to Cat. Porter? Cat's better than Porter. It's almost like the trade that I've had on my mind to try and get Kevin Durant. And we're talking about getting Giannis for that. The Nuggets can offer up a first-round pick in 2031. And they could give Milwaukee Peyton Watson, and they could give Milwaukee Michael Porter. Heck, I consider throwing in Christian Brown if it got Giannis. There's no way Giannis is going to get traded for that little. I actually don't think he's going to get traded before the season. And I think that's the big one that people are hoping for this offseason. I don't think he's getting traded this offseason. I don't. But if that's the going rate for Giannis, then the Nuggets need to jump in on that. That, to me, sounds like some New York arrogance to think that Cat, Tyler Kolek, and some first-round picks in 2030 are going to get it done. Come on. No way. But that's what time we're just throwing out ideas, seeing what sticks until Oklahoma City and Indiana are over, and then we'll really get into the silly season when it comes to the NBA. That'll be it for me today. Got a jet. Appreciate your patronage. I'll be back tomorrow at 3 right here on Extra Sports 1300. If you missed the first hour of the show by chance, that's coming up next here on Extra Sports 1300.